Welcome to Fails on the Trails. On this podcast, runners share their stories behind their DNF, did not finish, or DFL, dead freaking last, experiences. Our goal? To help you learn from what went wrong in a previous race so that everything can go right in your next race. I'm Justin Smith, proud owner of 13 DNFs, and I'm joined by
Lisa Decker, and I have 17 DNFs.
And I'm Nicole, and I have 5 DNFs.
And together we are your DNF experts. So lace up your running shoes and come along for the ride as we unpack the stories, mistakes, and lessons learned from the fails on the trails.
Okay, well, welcome, Halbert. Welcome to our podcast, Fails on the Trails. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? What do you do? And what are you about?
Name is Halbert. It's hard to claim a place because everybody goes like they were born and raised in a specific spot. I was a Navy brat from birth, and by 9th grade I'd moved 17 times. Normal for me is being mobile, and so I've never really had a place I claimed as home. Although I've lived here where I'm at now longer than I have anywhere in my life, any other place in the entirety of my life. But I wouldn't say I'm from Kentucky. I just happen to reside in Kentucky. I always make that distinction. I reside here. I'm not from. But yeah, that's the long and short of like the getting started. Work is do software development by trade. Right now, actually, just as of a few weeks ago, I'm back to in the job hunt market because the company I was working for, they have clients, different companies and different organizations and everything. And the client decommissioned the project I was on, and I was the sole developer for that project. So fun stuff.
Is your work
So
typically like you get a project and then you're on it for so long and you just kind of go from project to project?
It's varied. When I first moved to Kentucky, shortly after that, I started on a contract at Fort Knox, and it was a job where it was mostly a support role that was client-side support that evolved into software development. And then I've been doing software development since then, but it was a variety of things where we had a few core things that were like maintainable tasks that are like the ongoing pieces. And then I'm a big fan of utilities. So automation scripts and everything. If it was something that only needed a script, I would make it a script. But if it could benefit from being a full-blown app, and usually it's more a matter of making my job easier for me kind of things. But it's a plus too because I get paid to do my hobby. I play with computers all day. So I would, it wouldn't be unusual to get off of work and then turn around and just start writing code on my own laptop for something that I was working on for my own stuff.
So how did you get into running?
A lifetime ago, I was in the Army, and I didn't re-enlist because I didn't want to run anymore. And then I was out for a few years, and I had been working at a company where I had the right girl with the right set of eyes ask, Halbert, are you running the 10K with us next month? And I was like, yes, I am. And signed up. I ran the 10K. And then from that point, ended up running a number of like 5Ks and 10Ks for a few years. And then my first marathon was the result of a former boss who we ended up both getting relocated as a part of a company merger. And so he was working in a different department, but we'd maintain a friendship. And I remember stopping by to check one time, and he was telling me that at the time he was saying, I want to do a half triathlon by my 40th birthday. And I just smiled and nodded. And in my head, I'm like, I don't know what that means. So I went back and I Googled it and found out about the actual sports that's involved with it. And I was like, okay, biking, cool. I loved biking when I was a kid. And then swimming. Oh, no, I'm out. I can swim well enough to stay alive, but I don't know for how long, and I don't want to push that. And then running, I was like, well, I've been running 5Ks and 10Ks. And so my mindset was, if I'm only doing one event, I'll just do a full marathon. Because why would I do a half marathon if I'm only doing one event? And so I just skipped half marathons and went straight to a full. And then at the finish line, I thought I could do better than that. And so I came back the next year. And then I came back a couple more times over the years, but I had moved away from that area and didn't run any marathons or anything for 6 years. And then in 2011, I went back to that same marathon, Flying Pig Marathon in Cincinnati. And I've now run that one 10 plus times. The follow-up to the 2011 was a road trip where I was all over the place, and I added another marathon. And that was the first time I did 2 within 1 calendar year. And that was a big deal for me. And then the next year, I signed up for Flying Pig again, and that was marathon number 5 in 2012. And the follow-up was, well, I did 2 marathons last year. Maybe I'll do another one later this year. Later this year was 2 weeks later, up in Michigan, because I saw a race that looked interesting, and it was their inaugural run. I don't do inaugural runs anymore. There's too much variability. But I thought, if nothing else, I'll have the story of my dumbass trying to do 2 marathons in 2 weeks apart. And that led me to do another one later that year. And at that race, I met some people that were, because there's community and everything. And this is like the ultra running side is definitely a great reflection of that. But just even with the marathons, there are, the clubs for everything. And there were a couple people from some of the marathon clubs there. And during the race, I was chatting with them, 2 of the people that were in one of them. It was one of the ones where you have to qualify to join by X number of marathons within a certain window of time. And so I had already met the base level requirements. And same thing, pretty girl with pretty eyes was saying, you should join a club. And this is how cults are formed. A pretty girl says, join the club. And I'm like, okay. And so I joined, and then thought, okay, well, I should run another one. And the next one ended up being the following Sunday. So that was when my dumbass tried to do 2 marathons 1 week apart. And it was also my first week within the running club. And the social aspect of just that at the time, this was before the marathon bubble was really spiking in the teens. It was just that, again, that sense of community. I'm an introvert by nature, but I've developed the ability to socially interact. And part of it was that first year of running marathons, especially because I've got no training discipline. So my training is usually last week's race for this week's race. And since I am consistent, and I make no excuses for being back the packer, I know it's because I have no training discipline. But I would be back there and having conversations with other people. And over the years, it progressed to where, you run in the same faces everywhere. And the normal question is, where are you running next week? So 2004 and 5, it was 1 marathon each. 2011, I did 2. And 2012, I did 19. 2013, I did 28. Next year, 38. And 38 is the most I've done in a single year. And I don't recommend it. I tell people, don't do what I do. Just be active.
Whenever you ramped up and you got to like 2019 where you really ramped up, were you even caring about your finishing time, or were you just kind of chasing the vibe?
I've got a number of things that I label as different mantras that have been associated, that I use frequently with running, especially because there's always new people, and so you're telling the same stories often enough. I usually clarify, I don't like running, but I love running events. There is a vibe to it. There is something about the just the atmosphere of it. At first, I thought it was, again, thinking about like the road running side of it, I thought it was just the Flying Pig is a phenomenal community support. There are people, I remember one of my friends talking about going out. She and her boyfriend went into the hotel the night before. He wasn't a runner, so she got up at 5:30 to walk to the starting line. And there were locals setting up their little camp chairs along the side of the road at that hour because they love this race so much there. And that support you find in some cities, I thought that might be part of it. And then as the years progressed, there have been trails where I can't see anybody in front of me. I can't see anybody behind me, but I'm totally cool just being out there in the space. It's something about, it's still the event, but it wasn't all the noise and all the everything else that was it. It was just the aspect of this is just the event itself. And each one is unique. There are a number of road races though, where you run through. It's have I run this race before? Just because there are some city streets that always mirror in any town you go, and there's one street that looks like every other town you've been in.
So what drove you to switch from marathons to ultras?
It's not so much a switch. I just did my first attempt at a 50 miler. Well, actually, no, I stand corrected. My first ultra was a 50K. So I didn't jump the gun like I did with Skip, doing a few marathons before I ran my first half. But so in one of the running clubs, I'm trying to avoid naming the clubs just because if I say anything that people don't like later, I don't want anybody lashing out. But there was a challenge, basically. There were different ways to get fake internet points. There's a score target. And so one of the ways to get the highest score was to do 50 marathons within 365 days. I stand corrected. 30 states within 365 days. That's what I did. Blending different events and challenges. And so as I was going through and trying to knock out these states, I had a specific event I wanted to be my 30th state. And so starting off with that first race in the club being up in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, which is currently my only streak I've maintained, just because I've never lived in Wisconsin. I have only visited Wisconsin for the marathon and one wedding, and there are people there that know me by name. I will be greeted by locals on the course. There's a group of them that the one guy's property line is right along the course out in the tail end of the split. And when you pass by, he was handing out beer to runners as they went by. And I can't drink beer. I'm allergic to the hops, but I would drink anything else. And so the first year, one of his buddies was like, "You want vodka?" I was like, "Let me hit the turnaround and come back before I do, just to make sure." But so stuff like that. But with the initial challenge, though, that was state number 1 of my challenge push. And so as I progressed through for the challenge, though, I had found a race in Chicago. Illinois was another state I didn't have yet, but it was a 50K, and I hadn't run a 50K, and I was back and forth on the word only is always so problematic. It's only 5 more miles, but this was a race with a strict cutoff time. And anytime they use the word strict and cutoff time, I get paranoid, especially now that I've gotten slower. With this race, I'd gone to Chicago, the Lakefront 50K. They have a spring and a fall, I believe. I went up there in the spring, and I was paranoid because it was out and back a few times on this course, but I hadn't run it, and I had a strict cutoff. And because I wanted that one specific race to be my finish of the challenge, I didn't have any freebie weekends anymore, because by that point, there was no making up the numbers if I couldn't get that to fit. And so, yeah, the 50K was ultra paranoid, and running in an area where I had crappy service, and cell phone batteries at the time were much worse too. So with that constant polling, I didn't want my battery dying before I could reach the finish line. So I would put it in airplane mode. I'd run to an endpoint, and I would take it out of airplane mode and text a friend of mine who was my talking me off the ledge kind of friend. And I would just status update, this point, put it back in airplane mode. Excuse me, tongue-tied. Airplane mode, and run back. And that was also the first time I ever had pickles or soda on a course. And I realized how phenomenal pickles and soda are for ultras. But I remember by the 3rd cycle, I texted, and it wasn't until I had gone back the other direction that I saw her response saying, and that was when I was, I believe, at the halfway point. I got a text back from her after I hit the next segment saying, "That's a little fast," because we'd now at that point run several races together where she knew my pace. So I was paranoid, but I got in under the wire. So it was doable, but it was stressful.
And that's like the lakefront paved path, right? Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I run in minimalist shoes. I am very much a fan of road races because of that, and because I'm a klutz. Trails mean rocks and roots, and I have dropped more F-bombs surrounded by trees than anywhere else when it comes to running. And yeah, it was well managed. And like I said, the aid station, having new things that I hadn't had before, was notable and very helpful, and something I remembered as the years went by.
Was your thought whenever you finished that 50K, thank God that's over, I can get back to running my weekend marathons? Or was it, once this 30 marathon challenge is over, I need to try another one of these?
It was one of those kind of break the seal things for ultras. Definitely. And over the years, I've done all the main distances. So I did the 50K, 50 miler, 100K, 100 miler. The only one I've found I don't like, but it's, again, it's all mental. Our brains are assholes. I say this all the time in regards to many aspects, but my brain with 50 milers, I don't get that same, again, I'm not winning awards or anything. I'm slow. My target is finish hours and finish minutes. Just get there and be done and enjoy the day. But 50 milers, I never have that same little mental dopamine, not even dopamine, just accomplishment sense that I get from any of the other distances. I've DNF'd at 100 milers and felt like I got more out of the day than I did at 50 milers I finished. So, and that's one of those things I still can't place because there's no rhyme or reason to it.
My theory, just based off my experiences, when you're doing a 100-miler and things really start to get real is when it starts to get dark. You want to be asleep. You're low on calories. You're low on salt. And you got to do a lot of problem solving to get through that. But if you're doing a 50-miler and you get to that point, you're pretty much just done. So maybe
Yeah, that's
you
fair.
feel like you're missing out on the sucky part that we have to
Yeah,
fight through.
Not enough suffering.
Yes.
Yeah. Although the worst, as far as suffering I ever went through was, I don't know if anybody else has done the Pistol Ultra.
Not yet. On my list.
It's really well managed. The best aid station for any ultra I've ever had, Woody's at Pistol Ultra. It was my first 100. It was also a DFL. So so this will actually work out well enough for a segue since it's tied to the theme.
Yeah,
Let's
perfect
do it.
segue.
Oh.
So Pistol is one where it's a looped course, and in this case, it's currently a 10 loop cycle, and they have a different waypoint if you're doing the 50K versus the 50K and 100K versus 50-miler, 100-miler. It's just a slight variation on the endpoint. That way you can have the same starting line and the same turnaround point at one end of the circuit. The first year I ran the 100 there was not intended to be a running of a I wasn't planning. I knew 100 was on my horizon at some point. There was a family of runners, mother, father, daughter, who I was friends with. I had met them all during the marathon series, where they had the mother and father were both running the marathon, and the daughter was running her first half marathon. Made friends with everybody. Then like I said, with the community, we started seeing each other everywhere, especially like southeastern U.S. I was running a lot of those over and over. Even over the course of the years, I've done more repeats of those just because once I finished that 30-state challenge, anything with like a 6 to 8 hour window, I consider drivable and acceptable for, not a lot of planning requirement for logistics and everything. Anything in the range of like 10 hours plus, then I need to convince myself it's worth traveling to it. Because again, it's the events. It's not necessarily an individual race for most of it. It's the maintaining that attending the things that I enjoy, the running events. But at Pistol, the daughter, over the course of the years, I was there unintentionally for her first half marathon because that's when I met the family. And then I was there the day after I ran the lakefront in Chicago. I drove overnight from Chicago to Nashville to see that same friend who was talking me off the ledge. She was running a marathon in Nashville the next day. So I drove to meet my friend and celebrate at the finish line, and we went and got ice cream and everything. But while I was waiting for her to come across the finish, I see mother and daughter, and the mother's pointing and yelling for the race director who's at the finish line, "It's her first marathon!" And so I was unintentionally there for her first half and her first full. And I joked with the family that if she ever did a 50K, I guess I had to go and do that, or a 50-miler rather, because I later was there for her first 50K at an event. She did a 50-miler, I did the 50-miler, and I told her I'm not promising anything else as far as events because I didn't want to sign up for it. Well, Pistol, at 1 year I'd gone to pace a friend of mine, and she was one who needs a pacer in the early race. Just goes out too fast, even knowing it's a tendency would go out too fast. This is one of the races that fully established how big of a problem that could be, though. So Pistol, this was the year before they changed the course layout, and so she was able to actually drop from the 100-miler to the 100K. When I showed up in the wee hours of the night, because I had dinner at home and then drove down to Tennessee, and I was going to run with her through the night, and I met up with her out on the trail with somebody else running alongside her, and we'd only gone a few hundred feet. She's like, "Will you hate me if I drop to the 100K?" I was like, "I don't care. It's your race. You do what you need to do. I'm just here for support if you want to push it." And then we ended up watching like Mean Girls and everything on my phone in my car while we waited for her ride to come pick her up afterwards. And then as I was getting ready to drive off, one of the other runners, the one who had been pacing with her when I met them on the trail, he was just about to start his last loop. And I yelled out, "Hey, you need a pacer?" And he's like, "Yes, this is where I learned not to volunteer to pace people," because it was
You
so
didn't want
hot.
to turn it down.
It
Was
was
this your
so
first ever
hot.
pacing gig?
Essentially,
And-
but it was I hard pressed to call it really pacing so much as motivating and nudging. It's one of those things where very similar to, and most of my stories are marathon associated. So if I keep referencing, I apologize. I know this is an ultra focused, but
Fun.
I run into more first timers at marathons because I am back of the pack, I am consistently running races everywhere. I run a ridiculous number compared to most of the population, even though we have this like less than a single digit percent of the population even runs a marathon in their lifetime. And then the ones that run multiples are usually still smaller numbers. But it's what I found is usually the sweet spot is like the last 8 miles of a course. And most of the time, it's just talking to them and getting them out of their own head. And over the years, I've had so many running stories where I can just chatter away and then get to the point where there's like a lamppost and be like, think you can get a little jog in you? Think you can go from this lamppost to the next one? And just move them along. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they keep going. I've been left behind by a couple too, where they had the energy and I didn't at that point. I was like, I'm going to keep moving, but I can't maintain a jog farther along just yet. So it was sort of that same thing. So I was out there pacing him for his last loop, but it was also one where I'd run the other distances at Pistol, and I was fully aware of like the course layout and everything. So I was like, okay, I was at some point, that was probably where I was getting the initial inkling of I'll probably come here for 100. And the next year they changed the course layout to make it the even 10 loops. And I remember being out there, and that same mother, daughter, and father trio, he wasn't running because he was ill, but the mother was running and the daughter was running, and they were running together because they had trained together. And then I was just chatting with them initially along the course, and I was just doing whatever their splits were. And then the mother kept wanting to go a little bit faster than their agreed upon and trained pace. And so I remember the daughter getting upset with her, and she's like, fine, you go. I'm doing what we trained for. And then kept going through. And then as we progressed through the night, it got to the point where at Pistol, they have a school as the starting and finish line. And they let the people use the facility as their like staging area, and the heat's on in the building. So when it gets in the wee hours and somebody needs to warm up, it's a nice spot to do it. Power wasn't on that year. And so when she had gotten to mile 60-ish, she was blistering poorly on her feet. Yeah, and long story short, her father and I tried talking her into, you got to get back on your feet and keep moving if you're going to. But she wanted to stop, and it's like, okay, it's your race, your choice. And so I continued on, and then I was on my own for the rest of it. And the way the course is laid out, again, with that school there's a parking lot. The parking lot was my car. And so after we decided we're not talking her back into the course, I thought, you know what? Let me nap for an hour. That way I didn't have a phone or a Garmin that was up for ultra distances, battery life. So I was like, I'll charge my Garmin for an hour and I'll nap. And my alarm went off after an hour, and I dismissed the alarm and I fell back asleep.
About what mile is this for you?
This was the closing out the 60-mile loop.
Okay. That's about that time.
Yep. And I unintentionally slept 3 hours instead of 1. I woke up in panic mode. I remember I woke, and it was more I had to go to the bathroom than anything else. And at that point, the tail end of the course, of that loop on the course, before they had made the current shifts that they have, so they still have a 10-mile loop, but it's more refined now. But there was a park where you went and did a little lollipop and out and back. And so, but down there was also another set of bathrooms. And I was like, okay, the school is, I can see the door, but that's technically backwards. Let me go down the hill to the park, use the bathroom, continue on, and everything else. So that motivated me to get going. And I was hobbling. I remember the minimalist shoes on a 100-miler, not a fun day, because that was a new experience at that degree of mileage and everything else. And I remember it felt so good to pee that my feet stopped hurting. That was one of those weird physical sensations. It was just like, okay, now I can run. But I'd lost any safety buffer I had as far as time. And so for what I'm capable of, I'm booking it. And I remember there's a particular hill I'm not a fan of on the back end of the loop, but it's past Woody's aid station. And Woody's, I remember one of the questions was talking about like favorite foods. One of my favorite meals in general because of this race on ultras, grilled cheese sandwiches and chicken noodle soup. Those got me through that race because they're so easy on the stomach, quick and easy and portable. So yeah, Woody's and chicken noodle soup and the grilled cheese sandwiches got me through that one. And I remember going through, and there was a hill, and I ran past somebody because he was walking up the hill. And it's not a pleasant incline either, but I ran past him because I was, again, panic mode. I've lost my safety buffer. I need to run, go out, turn around, come through, And by the time I was finishing that loop and coming through, there were bathrooms there. And the guy who I'd passed on the hill was going into the bathrooms before taking the loop. And I was using the bathroom before continuing back. And I remember him asking me, as I'm like on my way out of the door, washing my hands and I don't need paper towels. I just need to go and move, shaking my hands off and everything. And he's like, what was that? Did I see you run up that hill? What was that? And all I could say is panic, and just kept running. And so I get to the point where sun comes up. Sun comes up, you have that biochemical reaction, everything, you feel a little more energized, but I'm slogging. And I had my friend who, again, the same one, Heather, was the one who had talked me off the ledge in my first 50K. She was there running that night. I believe she ran the 50-miler, but her boyfriend was also running the 100-miler. And so she had paced him for part of his tail end. And then when I crossed through, the way the finish goes is the start and finish is at the entrance to the school, but on the close out your loop, you have to actually pass the start and finish line, down through the park and everything, back up, and then that's the actual finish. And so as I'm coming through, she sees me there, and she comes up to me, she says, what do you need? I just need to refill my water bottle. She took the bottle from me and said, just keep moving, because it was down to the wire on the clock. And when I was passing through, I've now learned nobody at the finish line expected me to finish in time.
It
was a 30-hour cutoff.
You're doing your last loop. Is this coming in on mile 90?
This was the 98-ish, because that whole closeout part where I mentioned like this, you actually pass the start finish, but it's not the close of the loop. And so I pass through, she takes my water bottle, refills it, catches up to me. And thankfully, again, she's run with me at a number of races where she knew my pace. So I remember, and I remember, you're so exhausted, you're overreacting to everything, even emotionally. So in my head, I'm like weepy in my brain, just thinking, oh, I can't let her down because she's running with me to help make sure I get through this and everything. But we also ran enough where I didn't apologize when I had to take a walk break. So it's like hobble, 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 hobble. Okay, walk. Okay, run. And she would just occasionally just look down at her watch to check the pace, but didn't say a word. And that's because she knew that's what I needed. And so we went through, and I'm beating myself up. I can't let Heather down for helping me through all this. And we come up, and I crossed the finish line in my first 100-miler, 30-hour cutoff. I had 2.5 minutes to spare. I actually have locals who run a local running store. The first time I went in there to try to find trail shoes, the people there greeted me like they knew me. They were at the finish line that day. But I remember like crossing the finish line, and I just went through, and there's a little mat. I was looking around, there were no chairs, so I just laid down on the ground. I was done. And people were coming up and laughing and taking pictures. And I remember thinking in my head, nobody's asked me if I'm okay. And then the race director comes up. Now, pistol. One of the things I like is everything is pistol themed. So for the buckle, you get a buckle that has a little revolver and the chamber spins. And they have thematic elements for all the other distances as well. But if you're dead last, I had a fleece blanket handed to me while I'm still lying on the ground. Fleece blanket, and it has slowest draw award embroidered on it.
Nice.
Cool.
And so, yes, so my first my first ultra DFL was quite notable, and it was like my biggest distance to date at that. Even now, I don't need to go beyond 100. I am cool with that.
Never
Kind
say
of the
never.
same question for the K. After that 100-mile finish, were you just like back to marathons? That was too much anxiety, or were you kind of the bug got you?
What I usually like when I do my tally for races, I usually say I'm X number, and I always say marathons or longer. It just is a bucket, because I've never tracked how many 5Ks or 10Ks I had done, because those were sporadic. I know the number of half marathons I've run in my life can probably fit on my two hands, but I still couldn't tell you how many I've done. But marathons, I wanted to track that. And then I didn't consider myself so much an ultra runner, as far as more the mindset of like a regular. And so since ultras were going to be the one-offs for me, I just pooled them as one collective tally. So I knew I wasn't done with ultras, and I knew I wasn't done with hundreds either. I've failed to finish a few of those. I DNF a number. The shortest DNF for hundreds, though, for me was Phoenix for Javelina. And I remember it was over 90 degrees at the start in the dark. And so, and it was in October. So that's why I thought October in Arizona should be safe. I'm a dumbass. No time is safe. But the majority of them, it's usually well past the halfway point. And there are a number of things I've noticed through the years too, where like if it's a 100-mile race, I know consistently I will hallucinate. I consistently hallucinate what I think are taillights of vehicles way out in front of me, even if I'm on a trail where no vehicle could reach. That's always what I end up seeing out there. And I realize it's happening after a bit. But yeah, it's weird. And then I've got a tendency to sleepwalk.
Nice.
I'll nod off and I'll open my eyes and I'll be a step or two farther than I was and won't remember taking those steps. One of my DNFs was the Beast of Burden up in New York. They have a summer and winter, and it is physically rough in both. I have a friend who's done both scenarios, and it took a number of tries for her to finish, I believe, the summer one. But they have a canal that you go out and back, and the canal is on your right-hand side. I always drift right when I do the sleepwalk. And I was finishing the 50 and I kept going off the sidewalk to the grass, closing out the 50. So I pulled myself from the course because I was like, I cannot risk that as an injury. And I definitely, like a number of the things I do in my life, come down to one of two taglines. Because it made me laugh, or if nothing else, I'll have the story. I'll have a story. And I didn't need the story of falling into the canal at the Beast of Burden 100-miler. Yeah.
I was waiting for you to go there. That's what I was like, oh, we're getting wet.
Yeah. I do have sense about like my limits. That's definitely helped over the years. Learning, same thing you tell first timers on the shorter races, know the difference between sore and pain. Sore you can push through, pain you have to respect because something's wrong, and little details like that.
I wanted to ask what the temperature was when you finished the pistol race that you were last.
Pistol, I don't recall offhand. I remember I was warm, but I overheat easily. I more often than not, the heat's what at the end of like any DNF or DFL, it's usually heat related because it saps the life out of me. Like right now we've had so many days of consistently like 20-degree weather where I've been layering up to do my daily miles, like run, walk, or crawl. I've done a mile a day for 11 and a half years now. But I'd layer up, and then today I wore shorts and a t-shirt because it was 40 something, close to 50, because it was one I've gotten acclimated to that cold as the baseline for the last, since before the ice storm came through. But like 60-degree weather, I've been uncomfortable at races while running. And as soon as the sun comes out, I already know it's going to happen, but I just keep going through. But that's an aspect where I know it's going to affect me, but it's not going to stop me unless it's something where I know the math isn't going to work out for time, or I keep pushing through, but it's just saps enough out of me that I lose the time on without noticing it.
For all the runners out there that struggle in the heat, have you found any like tricks or anything that kind of helps to deal with it? Salt pills, sweet tea. There's lots of different things out there. Have you found anything that works for you?
I like having salt tabs on hand, mostly for quick fix for upset stomach now, which I learned, and pickle juice. I love pickles and pickle juice as my go-to. If I've got an upset stomach before the race starts, those travel centers will usually have like those full-size giant dill pickles in a single pickle in a bag. I'll eat the pickle and drink the juice because that sodium overload helps combat with the cramping, even for the upset stomach side. But I had food poisoning at a marathon once, and I found this out because we all had the same free dinner from the race. And what it was, the race has since changed its name, which I think is tied to this because they just couldn't shake that thing. But they wasn't intentional, obviously. Nobody, well, I hope. But they had like 2 lines for food, and then each line had spaghetti with meat sauce and spaghetti without meat sauce. And only, by all estimations, it was like 1 batch of meat sauce was bad. Well, I was doing a double that weekend. I had run in Mississippi the day before and then drove over to Alabama to run the next day. And so since it was a themed double, they knew other runners were coming over. And so when they had all the leftovers from the free dinner, they went ahead and just pre-boxed everything. And so they mixed all the sauces together. And so this is where I first had like a perfect like image for like the resiliency and stubbornness of runners, because I'm at the starting line and you could look around and be like, you've got it. We knew we had food poisoning and we all still went to the starting line to run a marathon. It's always amusing to me. That's always one of the examples I go back to for like stubbornness and all that. But that around mile 18-ish, there was an aid station where I was alone on the course at that point because, one, slow guy, but also a lot of people dropped from the food poisoning thing. But we had an aid station where the guy had pretzels, pickles, and pickle juice. I took all of it. And as I'm going through and getting all of that down, noticed I started feeling better. And what it was is, again, sodium overload helping combat that. And so salt tabs are always in my race belt when I run races, even shorter distances. It's something where I tend to do it. And I try to make it a habit even when I don't have training discipline. So when I go on a training run, I'm using that loosely. That's the only when I have like something specific that I need to get a little extra prep for. And so there's a nearby lake where, depending on which turns you can take, you can make it a 4-mile run or a 7-mile run for one loop. And so, but even out there, I try to make it a habit to at least bring it with, just because you don't know if you're going to have a cramp or whatever.
Have you had the element packets yet? It's
don't think I
1,000
have.
milligrams of sodium, and you just pour it in a bottle of water. So
I've tried the different drinks over the years.
okay.
Noon was another one that was really good for the hydration aspect and everything else, and the electrolyte boost. A number of those don't settle well with my stomach, so I tend to like foods are mostly safe. Pre-race, I've found that grains and cheese are problematic, I guess is the best way to put it. It wasn't until one year I was running the Little Rock Marathon, and a bunch of us were having dinner. You run into everybody, and you end up meeting people you never thought you would as a result of this. So I remember meeting Bart Yasso, one of the years running that one, and one of the local hotels, he always stayed at the same place. They put him up there because they would bring him in, and he would, be the announcer for the event and everything. Well, once like a couple years after meeting him, there was one of the nights where he was like, "You guys all usually get together before the race and the night before the race and do dinner together, right?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Tell everybody just grab some food and come up to my room, and so we'll sit and chat and everything." And so while I'm waiting on my pizza, one of the other guys from our group had ordered a pizza with no cheese. And I was like, "Well, I'm an idiot. I'll take a pizza with no cheese." And I was able to eat the whole thing, and I didn't feel that dense weight. And so learning those things that don't play well with your system, and cheese is a common enough culprit for a lot of people. So that's why I always use that pizza as an example. It was still good. And then some grains. So, the carb load thing isn't really a surety for me because some grains just don't play well. And so I don't like gluten-free pizza crust, but if they have it as an option, sometimes I'll do that. But the no cheese was the biggest thing for me as far as that. When it comes to like Noon and you mentioned Element, I don't have a go-to like product that was like this brand was a great consistent thing for me. It was usually I'll try this once, but I won't try it on an ultra. I won't try it on, because no matter, well, since I pushed through a marathon with food poisoning, I could push through only a marathon. Again, that word only. I could push through only a marathon if it doesn't go well, but I didn't want to risk an ultra being affected by a stomach that was out of control. Because
One thing that
what I
works
usually
really
politely
well
refer to
for
as
me,
digestive distress.
one thing that works really well for me when I do like races in Texas and it's like a heat loop, really hot. I have sweet tea at my car, and because it's tough for me to eat when it's really hot. It's tough to take in calories, but when you're drinking sweet tea, you're taking in all those calories, and it cools me down. And it was just something I really looked forward to. I did a race. It was 106 degrees. I did a 100-miler, and it was just mostly fueled on sweet tea and bacon. It was magical. So definitely something to keep in mind if there's any runners out there with a hot race coming up. A nice cold sweet tea might hit the spot for you.
I like that idea. And
Definitely.
there have been
Lisa's doing a habanero 135 this year, right?
Yep, I got selected from the wait list. I just need to register, but I'm doing the 135.
Yeah. Okay, I'll
me
bring you some sweet tea.
I'll pack the sweet tea.
Yeah, and I found like with the ultras, if I do have like the whole my stomach's not playing well during the day, or the heat factor is a problem during the day, I may be hitting a calorie deficit, but I'll wait until later in the day to avoid having a full stomach, or full being relative, a couple bites of something I might feel too full at an aid station, but to feeling really full and having heat still, I'd rather wait until the sun starts to set and then cools off, so I have a little tempering of that effect.
Well, I just found this last weekend, it was hotter than we expected. I haven't been doing heat training because it's February, but we got up to about 80 degrees. And I wasn't feeling sick or nauseous, but I just didn't want to chew anymore. So I would just grab handfuls of the Welch's gummies, and I had Nerds clusters with me, and those are really good in sodium. And I would just chew on those. That way I can like move and chew and they were easier than like chewing like real food. It's very,
That's I forgot about that part of it too. Yeah, the act of chewing can be, I mean, not even just, well, monotonous and annoying. It's not a matter of not capable. It's just a matter, I'm just sick of chewing. And that's where I was talking about like
I
the
may or
grilled
may
cheese
not have
sandwiches.
asked, I may or may not have asked aid station workers to chew the food and like baby bird it to me.
To all of our listeners,
over it.
Lisa's referring to her Rocky Raccoon 100-mile finish over the weekend.
Yes, that's why I'm like, I'm out of it.
Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rocky Raccoon was my first DNF after my first 100 because, well, and I have to make sure I pull my spreadsheet for this one because there was a distinct reason.
We say we're unpacking this one.
Yes.
So the friend who had a tendency to go out too fast, I knew she needed a pacer for her. So the next year she went and she had registered for Rocky Raccoon. I had run Pistol. Pistol was the 2nd of January that year. This was 2016. I ran the weekend after the 100-miler. Recovery is very important. I ran a double marathon weekend, and then the weekend after that, I ran a single marathon, and then I had 2 weeks off, and then I ran at Rocky with a friend. And the friend, because I knew she needed the pacer at the start. Now, I registered for this expecting a DNF because my goal wasn't for me to finish. My goal was to keep her on pace for the start. And so we got out there, and this is also where I running Pistol, since it is paved trails through like City Park and all sorts of other stuff, there's enough lighting that you can get by without a headlamp even through the night. Rocky was trail, and so I needed a headlamp. I had never used a headlamp before, and I thought, not going to need this. I'm not going to need a good one. I just need one to get me through this night. So I don't need to go to REI and order the black diamond, blah, 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 blah. I just went to Target and picked one up off the shelf. And when I got out there, I remember distinctly because I've got my little headlamp on and I'm looking around and everybody else's is much brighter. There was one woman who I think it was 4 digits for her luminosity for her. Yeah. And some German something model, and I forget what she was saying her rate was for having to change the batteries out if she left it on full high beam. But it was still maddening because I would turn around and be like car blind. So we remember my headlamp for later because I will lose my train of thought. But we went out and we ran the loops, and it's 20 miles per circuit. That one I ended up at about mile 62 is where I split from her. I'd gotten her past the whatever juice you have in you, use it as you see fit from this point, because it was past I burned myself out too soon in the early miles. It was also the point where she gets mean because of the tired and everything. So it was okay to split. It's like, all right, happy miles. And at that point, I'd also swapped out the battery in my headlamp because it was a little dimmer than usual, because we'd been out there for that many hours. That was the first one where I remember distinctly the whole sleepwalking during an ultra thing, because there's a long stretch where it was like larger than eggs, but like pebbly, rocky stretch that was like rounded, smooth stones, if I remember correctly. And I remember that was one where I would open my eyes to somebody going, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I'd take another step or two, and then I'd hear somebody else going, "Are you okay?" For miles. And I made it to about mile 78. I was moving so slowly, my body heat wasn't keeping me warm because I wasn't burning enough energy to generate heat and all that other stuff. I remember like physically shivering standing next to a stove at an aid station at like 78. And I remember the aid station there too, looking at the math, and it was the whole, you had to meet a certain cutoff before you can start the last loop. I would have been able to start the last loop, but I knew I wouldn't have been able to finish in time. And I was like, again, I'd had 3 marathons since the 100-miler, a month before that weekend. And so it was just a ridiculous number of miles and everything else, a number of events that didn't get rest and recovery. And so I was totally cool with it. And so when it ended at 78. And then the rest was just basically working my way to the car and then finding somebody at the race committee side to say, "Hey, I'm dropping." As I then went to the car and then napped until she finished. And then I went out to make sure I was there based off of the timing of her splits, so I could at least be there when she crossed the finish line for her.
You had no expectations going in, but at some time during the race where you're like, you know what? I think I'm actually going to finish this. Did you get your hopes up?
When we had split, when she got mead and I had dropped off at 60-ish, I thought it was still viable, as long as things went well. And then once that deep exhaustion hit it was that it just took it out of me. And it was, again, that was one of those ones where I have no ego tied to running anyway, because the only time I get running age group awards are when there are 3 or fewer people in my age group, and I'm totally cool with that. But yeah, it was one of those things where it was still viable at that 62-ish mark. But by the time I did hit that 78, it was I'd been for miles. I had already known I'm not going to be starting the last lap. It's not practical, and I know I'll be stuck out there, in the circuit. Now, the shortest DNF I've had was Javelina. That was 28 miles. The farthest, I don't know that I've got good tracking for my farthest, where it's because if I made it to 90 something, it would have to be a time cutoff that fails me before I would drop from it. So I want it's got to be somewhere in the 70s, because once I had crossed into the last 20 miles, my brain would have probably latched onto marathon's only 26.2. Can you do that right now? But yeah, the brain games have never pushed me farther than that, I believe. But oh, go ahead.
I know I'm more of an ultra guy, but I'm still curious when Nicole was talking about a marathon DNF. So I don't mind if you want to go into some marathon DNFs too, because that's kind of interesting how those can come about.
The marathon DNFs have been very few for me. It's been a case of, I mentioned heat being something that undoes me. I've had a couple where it was just the heat just took so much out of me, where some races, if they explicitly use the word strict cutoff, and in addition to the word cutoff, then I don't mess around with the time and everything. And there have been races where they had a strict cutoff, and one I remember where the sweeper vehicle came up alongside me and she was going to just keep going, and I was like, you're passing me, so obviously I'm not meeting whatever target you're supposed to be. But then looking at the course map, I had seen I could ride in a sweep vehicle for a huge number of extra miles at sweeper vehicle pace, or I could just cut across, and especially since I was dropping from the race, I didn't have to worry about how long it took me to cross the blocks and the stoplights and everything else to get to the vehicle. So it was easier to go in a straight line and be done in another half hour of discomfort rather than ride around that vehicle. And then I would have had, my brain probably would have been where I, berating myself, even though I knew the heat was what had ruined me. I had a friend who was actually pacing at that particular race, who ended up having, it's unusual because it's someone who paces regularly, but had to drop from her own group because she started getting physically ill from the heat. So, but yeah,
It's
with the
wildly
DNFs,
different than ultras, having a pacer vehicle and then thinking that you can just cut across to where your car is too. That's interesting. I remember when Nicole was talking about hers, and I was like, oh yeah, there's cars there and a lot of different options than from if you drop in the middle of the woods on a trail for a race. Logistics are much more difficult to get you back to your car.
My ultra DNFs usually involve there's a volunteer and they don't get a break, they don't get a replacement for 2 hours, but I guess I can sit here for 2 hours as long as I can be warm. But because in the wee hours, and you start getting that bone chill. With my Coleman headlamp that I had picked up for Rocky Raccoon, I did find out later when I bought a headlamp that was distinctly brighter. I went back and I found the packaging for my Coleman one, because I was like, okay, that's when I realized, okay, the lumens count. That's the number you need to look at for brightness. Okay, cool. And it was 8, not 80, 8 lumens. It was intended as a campsite, don't blind your other camping participants kind of headlamp. So I can see if I get up in the middle of the night to go pee kind of thing, but not I'm running 100-miler trail. So
there's roots everywhere that you could trip over. I was head down the whole time looking for every single route out there, because I knew I was going to trip and fall because I'm a trip hazard.
Yes. Yeah, and the minimalist shoes have wrecked me with some races where I full on smacked my toes. As far as DNFs for marathons, though, then for some reason that reminded me. So most of my races, again, road races and marathons. Pikes Peak is one where I have DNF'd 3 times. And it's extra insulting because you don't even get the free t-shirt, the free t-shirt, because you don't get the t-shirt unless you cross the finish line. It's one where it's basically it's not a run. It's a hike. It's a climb, and I'm not built for climbing. I'm not really been repeatedly told not really built to be a marathoner either, because I took insult the first few times where somebody was like, "You're big for marathons," and I thought they were saying I was overweight. No, I'm 6'2" and 230ish, and I'm not elite runner build. But the first few times I was just like, should I be insulted? But yeah, so Pikes Peak, I went, and they have timed waypoints along the way up the mountain. And the point is that they have to be very strict about it because there are storm systems that roll through consistently. There have been races where the people, by the time they reached the top, a snowstorm had come through and blanketed the mountain path behind them. And they've got pictures of it on the thing. Every time you go to like packet pickup for that race, they've got pictures of the extreme cases. But there have been like heavy black clouds rolling through. The first time I did, that's what I saw coming through, and I didn't even make it because I forget what the first point is, but there's a point where it's like you have to cross one of the waypoints up the mountain, and they've got the chip reader, not just volunteers with like a stopwatch. They've got the chip reader, so there's no begging the volunteer saying, "Come on, let me go," because they've got a time-stamped failure. So and so I remember getting there that first year. And I hit that point where there were a number of people right in front of me, just sad, and this morose group sitting around and getting ready to go back down the hill because they can't continue on. And I missed it by 7 minutes my first year, that cutoff on that station. And so the next year, I remember I spent a lot of time on the Stairmaster thingy at the gym. I had changed my diet a few months prior to be, more focused on like clean eating and everything. I don't eat horribly, but I was like, this is something where out of all the races I've done, this one requires dedicated, intentional effort. And I'm not used to that. So let me put that into this. And I missed the cutoff by 5 minutes. And then the third year, I missed the cutoff by 5 minutes again. And I was like, all right, I don't need to come back. So I had a friend, she and her husband live in Manitou Springs at the base of the mountain. And so I had stayed with them, and she had busted her ankle, so she didn't get to run that year. And so she drove to the top and was handing beer to runners at the top. And then she had a cider for me since I couldn't have the beer. And I remember texting her with this spotty service. I was like, missed the cutoff. I'm continue on because I want to see the top of this mountain. I'm not coming back to this race. So I was like, I need to see the top. And then at the top of the mountain, in the normal race, you have to reach the top by 6.5 hours. And then it's, I think, 9-ish hour cutoff. Because when you turn around and go back down, it's just whoosh. It's speedy as all hell because you're not doing that constant climb. And they have these different landmarks. So like they refer to the Golden Stairs. It's a switchback, one person wide switchback through some little rocky bits. And, it's downhill runners have right of way and all that other stuff. Not a factor by the time I got there that day, because everybody else had been up and back down. But like I said, I just needed to see the top. And so as I was going through the Golden Stairs, and I was looking at the watch, and I was like, even if they had let me, like if I had been able to maintain the pace I had prior, I still have been way off from hitting the cutoff at the top of the mountain to be able to go back down. And so it's like, okay, I don't need to prove anything here. I definitely don't need to spend this much money to fail knowingly. So I'll just put it in other races.
So you made it to the top, and then she drove you back down?
And then we drove down, and then we actually had to stop because there was somebody you have to drive carefully because you don't want to burn out your brakes. Apparently, that's a really big risk with how steep the decline is driving out. So they got signs for that. But there are people that get elevation sickness too. So we saw somebody kind of wavering in a vehicle near ahead of us. And so when they pulled to a side lot, we pulled over and checked with the person, gave them some water and everything else. But yeah, it was something where I was like, I DNF'd that one 3 times, and that was a 3 strikes you're out kind of thing. I don't need to prove this, and I'm okay with that. Because again, I'm not built for climbing, and that's all it is. It's 13.3 miles of climb, because you stop a little. You go 13.3 out, and then you finish out just a little bit shorter on the way back into town. But yeah, so that one took it out of me. One of my favorites as far as DNFs was just because it was a decision factor race for me. And I've told Nicole this story before too. It was a race where at the end I decided I will never sign up for any more summer ultras because I don't deal well with the heat. And if I'm going to be miserable, I'm not going to pay to run in something that's going to make me unhappy the whole time. Even if I had finished a 100-miler in July, that would mean I'd be running in conditions that no matter where I am in this country, July is going to be too hot for me to be comfortable. And so I will be unhappy and uncomfortable for the entirety of it. And the only thing I'll be thinking about is not even the buckle at the end. It'll just be I just don't want to do this anymore. And I got tired of that feeling for summer events. And even with marathons, I tend to take July to September off. And because that same thing, but ultras, I gave their own little extra concession because, people like this race or people like that race. And I love Hennepin. Hennepin's probably if I talk about like the job hunting and everything, I'm trying not to schedule races right now because I don't know where I might end up. And I don't want to book, 13 marathons and find out I'm not that area of the country. So I'm holding off on everything and responsible spending factors too. But if Hennepin has any spots left by the time I find anything, Hennepin's one I definitely want to repeat. It's like an upside down T, but it's really well managed, really pretty. And it's not much of a PR, but it's still my PR for me. It's like about 15 minutes under 30 hours.
So I know earlier you said Woody's was the best aid station.
Yeah.
Hennepin, don't they have the 10 junk miles pig roast aid station? Or is that somewhere else?
If they did, I may have missed that.
That might be something else. I'm gonna have to look it up now and see. I've
one that
tasted
made me
Hennepin before. But I know, but yeah, so Hennepin, that's kind of like flat, fast. Isn't it? It's not rail trails, but it's like rail trails, right?
Yeah, that sounds right for the description because there was no crazy elevation. There was no any spot on the course where I remember distinctly like I can't wait to get past this part of it. And it was helpful for me that the first time I ran that one because there was a woman who was running about my pace and neither of us were chatty at that window, but she had a friend who was coming out she would park ahead, come back, run with her friend, and then they would talk, and that would just be a little mental distraction, kind of like having the TV on in the background. It was just something to give me a little extra alertness. And also, it was like I would turn off. It was so pretty out there. I would turn off my headlamp and just look up as when I got to like walking along one stretch. I remember I was like, I know this is perfectly straight line forever, so I don't have to worry about tripping over anything on this particular part because I believe that was even paved on that section. And so turn off my headlamp and I walk for a while. And then turn it on again and continue. But the one that made me stop doing summer ultras was a race where they had some rain and everything the few days prior. And before I even hit like the first 2 miles, I had slipped in some mud and twisted my knee to where I was hurting before mile 10. Like it was uncomfortable in the twist, but as I kept going, it kept getting worse. And they had mosquitoes. Now, the heat undoes me. Bugs make me viciously angry. I hate the whole, I run with my earbuds in just because I got tired of that mosquito buzz going where they go up and I joked that I was like one childhood trauma away from being a germaphobe. So that's probably part of it too. But I get angry at bugs it will ruin the day for me. So my bug spray was in the car. I didn't anticipate it, but because they'd had that rain and they had the standing water and everything, mosquitoes galore in this area. This apparently was the bugs were apparently a normal thing. So the aid stations had these giant chunky citronella candles burning and they had bug spray on a table. So once I hit the first aid station at mile 10, I grabbed the bug spray. Oh, thank goodness. And I don't want to spray near the table where they have the cups of water or where other people are coming through or spray on the volunteer who's there maintaining it. And so I'm backing up and walking backwards to get away from everything with the can in hand. Didn't notice the can on the ground that was like a small pail with a giant citronella candle in it. And I backed up into it and splashed the wax all up my leg. Now, I'm a hairy guy. And on top of this was my legs. So the brief shock, thankfully it wasn't like, hot pokers with the burn, but it was just a shock of like, oh, hot. And then I just had had cooled wax that then was holding and tugging hair as I initially started moving. Then it would crumble a bit. By the time I kept going, I spent the rest of the race with a leg with a stripe of wax dribbles. I
Help
continued
keep the
on.
bugs away? Did that help keep the bugs away, having like citronella wax on your leg at least?
Oh yeah, I totally. If you want to avoid bugs, just take a bath in citronella wax. Go out there. Madame Trousseau's got nothing on this. But no, so I got out there, and that one I made it through. I hit the turnaround and had started back, and that was I always try to remember you can't be a dumbass. If I give the same rule to new runners, I have to follow them myself. So that mantra about know the difference between sore and pain. My knee was in pain, and so I was like, all right, I this is going to affect my ability to finish. I'm still uncomfortably hot, and that one I believe it was like 62 or 67, 60 something when I hit an aid station where it was right about another like half an hour until the shift was changing. And one of the people was like, I can get you to your car. It's like, okay, done. And so, and that was the one where I promised myself no more summer ultras.
Wait, which race was this?
I wish I tracked, like I can look through my results and I'm sure I could find the specific one. It was, I want to say a July race, but I can't remember off the top of my head which one it is. Poor planning on my part for an interview call, huh?
You're fine. Well, you have so many races.
Yeah,
on the Excel sheet.
What's that?
I love that you have an Excel sheet.
I have a number, yeah. And so the running was something that helped me really learn to love conditional formatting in Excel. Because, and Nicole's actually seen like training schedule stuff for like the 100-miler. So I love the Ultra Ladies running website because they have the calendar and now they have it available in an Excel spreadsheet form. Well, I went ahead and I just added an extra tab to it and I added conditional formatting and everything else. So on my second tab, I just plug in the date of the race and it will tell me this is when your start date of the thing should be. And then it will highlight today's mile in bold and green background. And anything in the past is a gray. So I always know at a glance what mileage I need to be doing today when I open the spreadsheet. And then I have talking about like the marathons where sometimes I'm not always sure of what pace I need to, I know I'll finish, but am I going to finish before a cutoff that I'm concerned about? And so I've got a spreadsheet called Panic Calc. And all it does is I plug in the start time of the race and the cutoff time of the race. And then on the main sheet, I just plug in what mile I'm at any given point. So say I cross mile marker 17. I'll key in 17. It'll tell me you need to maintain a 16-minute and 20-second pace to reach the finish line before the cutoff time. It's also handy. I made sure to have that as a variable thing too. So I could plug in 100 if I was doing 100 miles. So it's got the distance and a start or cutoff time. And so I need to add a modifier, though, for time zones because spreadsheets on Google Sheets always remember the time zone it was created in. And so I need to add a UTC-based. I'm overthinking things. Sorry. I love data.
I wish you can just make an app for like a phone, and then a pacer could use that app when they're pacing a runner and say, based on my Halbert calculation app, you need to do a 14-minute mile to make it to the finish in time.
Yeah, since I do software development already, just as an aside, Google has a programming framework called Flutter that's open source and everything else, it's a Dart programming language, and you can target multiple platforms, but mobile is one of the key ones for it. And I've been learning Dart specifically so I can do that instead of that training spreadsheet with the auto update with the days. I just want to be able to say, okay, I can key in all those values for a set training schedule and then have it be my tracker. So save this as 100-miler training plan and then have custom training plan. Like if I want to do something distinct, I overthink a lot of things, but one of the other things is the panic calculator. It will be an app.
Yeah.
If nothing else, just for me.
Because
use it.
Yeah, you can, if you did anything like this over the weekend, I know you had pacers, but for us, it's, well, if I can do a 15-minute mile, that's 4 miles an hour. If I can do a 20-minute mile, that's 3 minutes an hour or 3 miles an hour. But then I'm not going to be able to do a 15-minute mile. So can I make it to the finish line doing a 20-minute mile? And by then you've just done so much math. So if we had the panic calculator.
Yep. And that's what started it, actually. The panic marathons, I used to always use the same qualifier of I can't do math after mile 19. And so if it's not a 15-minute mile, I'm not doing the calculation. It's just, and so that's where the spreadsheet was born. Because, and that's all it is. It's like I said, it's just a spreadsheet automating that little calculation piece. So it's only a few lines needed. I only put it on 2 different tabs just so I could have my date and my distance, as like the data sheet and then the protected fields on the other part. Yep.
do some final questions before we get into lessons learned. One thing I'm really curious about is you've done so many races. What really calls to you when selecting a race? And is there a race out there that you haven't done that is just on your to-do list?
Main thing at this point, there are a number of races I have that were repeats because they were social. There's this is a big one for like our running club in particular is having a meetup or an anniversary event at this one or whatever's going on. Or there's just the normal aspect of, again, community and everything. So when people are hitting milestones, I've gone to races that I had no intention of ever running, but it's so-and-so's 100th marathon or 200th or 300th or whatever. And so I would go to those. Initially, my first year in, I remember seeing on the Facebook page for the running group, somebody had posted, this is the last year before they went to a lottery, like everybody, a lot of the other ones do, but Big Sur. Someone had posted a link saying, hey, there are 90 spots left for the Big Sur Marathon. And I was still really new to marathoning as a hobby. And by the time I finished that 30-state challenge, it was just, I guess this is what I do with my weekends now. But this was early enough that when I saw people responding in that thread that, oh, I love that race, or I had that one. And I remember distinctly, someone said that that's a bucket race list for me. And I was still new enough that I was like, okay, I know people have run a marathon as a bucket list item, but who puts a specific race on a bucket list? And then I saw photos from people who'd run it before, and I was just like, oh, that's pretty. And so that a short while later, I got a confirmation email, and they saw that there were only 40 spots left for the Big Sur Marathon. And it was gorgeous. Now that's another one that has a cutoff that they have to enforce of something like 6 hours, but that's because they close off a stretch of Highway 1. So I've done that one. I didn't have it as a bucket list race, but it was one where I can see why people do. If they would choose a specific race. If people are doing one and done, I know a lot of people like to do Disney. I ran Disney as my 99th because I had a friend of mine who was supposed to be running her first marathon. I had somebody who was a high school reunion. I had done enough of them where everybody knew, well, that's what Halbert's doing. Halbert's the runner guy now. And one of them had mentioned some interest in running. And then later I had said, okay, well, if you ever run a marathon, let me know. If I'm free, I can maybe go run with you. If we can, maintain a comparable pace. And I got tagged in a Facebook post saying, and it was basically a copy of her registration confirmation for Disney. I was just like, and I looked at the timing. I was like, oh, because my was going to be Louisiana, and I had specifically shared that with friends, and because it was in a region where I had run so many, I had people who were coming to the race because it was my 100th. And so, which is also weird to me too, like people doing a thing for me and it's running. Anyway, we've all done plenty enough ultras that we get we're not normal, but it was still odd. But anyway, so it was close enough to where my 100 was supposed to be, and I also didn't want to risk an overlap, where I didn't want to steal the thunder of her first marathon with my 100th at Disney. So I played my scheduling very carefully and close to the all the way up to that point, and Disney was the last race prior to Louisiana. But I remember I hadn't heard any updates from her in a while, so I reached out, and 3 weeks before the race, I found out she's not running the race. She's not been running at all for a while because she had some microfractures in her hip, and her doctor told her to stop running, but she never told me. And I was like, I would never have run this race. I've never registered for this race. So Disney, it's a good, if you're going to do it once, all the lines for every one of the characters, because they have like the thematic characters along the course too for photo ops and everything else. And there are lines, and there was a line for a ride on one part of it. I think I had a road trip where I had like a very strict, I didn't have a race cutoff concern, but I think I had a road trip that I was immediately following with, if I remember correctly. And so my only photo was with Aladdin near the end. And I was like, hey, I know everywhere the movie, so sure, why not? It works. And so when we talk about like bucket lists now, I would like to run, it would probably be in like an international one. I'd love to run in London. That one I think is a lottery now too. I have to double check. I'm pretty sure. Most of the ones that I'm really interested in as far as like not my norm are races that are lotteries, and I don't remember to sign up until well after the lottery's done. And then Alaska's still on my list. That one's, though, I've been told you want to make sure you make it like a vacation week, because once you're done, there's one of the races where there's not much to do, but another one where it's like you want to spend a few extra days going around checking everything else. You also want to coordinate with people because it's not that cheap to stay up there, and so people usually like have like 5 people rent a house or something. Got a lot of planning to do for that one. But yeah, South Dakota for my last. It's not so much bucket list, but it is a distinctly planned thing.
There's a lot of parallels with what you're saying in ultra races too, with all the logistics and people wanting to do a 100-miler in every state. So there's tons of parallels between the two, and definitely parallels between the lessons learned. I will go ahead and kick this one off because I've been writing things down and I'm real excited to share. First lesson learned from this episode is get a headlamp with more than 8 lumens.
Absolutely.
Yes. The next one is I need to try to find out how to incorporate an Excel sheet. I've just been winging it for way too long. So
Email me. I'll share my spreadsheet as a template.
perfect. I love it. Yeah. Share it with all of us. My next lesson learned is the DNF experience. We were talking on our first episodes about how when we DNF, we beat ourselves up and it's so hard for us to get over. But you were talking about Pikes Peak, how you DNF'd and you hiked to the top of it because you wanted to see the top of the mountain. You made the best of the experience. So if there's a
That was
race
year
where
3, though.
yeah,
That was the third failure. The
so it might
first
take
time,
3 years.
the first time I was emotional. Like I remember like I had to wipe away tears and everything while I was sitting there, and I was kind of beating myself up a bit. Probably it's not often that I don't have, like, again, I'm used to being at the back of the pack. I don't have ego tied to races, and that actually I try not to go off and run more time because everything comes up with another story. One of the things that when I first started running, I'm big enough to admit I'm shallow. I would find like 5Ks and 10Ks. I would see somebody ahead of me and I would just look for somebody more heavy set. And I would just, anybody can beat me, but not that guy or something like that. And it's like, again, it's shallow, but it was something that would just push me and nudge me. I got past that unintentionally when I was running a 10K once where I was past, like I could see the corner ahead of me, and just past the corner is the finish line. And as I'm approaching the corner, I was passed by a child who was like easily elementary school age, ran past me. And then a guy an older couple that could have been somebody's grandparents, if not young great-grandparents, passed me. And a guy pushing a double stroller. And I was like, done. No more ego tied to this ever again. As long as I finish, a finish is a finish. So, but with Pikes, that was, the first time was rough. It was, and I remember though, because as I continue downhill, the volunteers don't know. They're being supportive, and that's one of the reasons I like races that have where even the volunteers are encouraging and everything else. And so, good, you got this. And I was like, I don't want to have to explain to every single one of them, oh, I failed. I just need to get back to my car because it's 13 or however many miles that way. But I continued down the hill and people would say, good job and everything. I said, thank you. And it just kept going because I don't need to weigh them down with baggage that I know is ephemeral. I'm going to be over this. I'll be fine, but this is just, and it's a rough few minutes, but I'll get through it. And so I remember, and I don't use Facebook regularly anymore, but I remember this was a lengthy post where I talked about like the downhill and everything else, and then it's Pikes Peak. When I got down to like street level again, off the actual mountain trails and onto the street, like you're going into town, they had the trolley of some little sightseeing thing as people are going by. And they're cheering and everything else because all they know is there's a race going on and here's a runner coming. And so I high-fived every damn person that stuck their hand out to cheer me on as I went by. I put on a good face and I ran, and I just made the most of the rest of that day. So it was one where once I just, like, I decided I didn't need to share the failure aspect of it with them. It let me get past it and get over it myself. And then having that encouragement, even if not misplaced, but they were unintentionally encouraging someone that, they didn't realize the real outcome kind of thing. But it was something where it's like, you know what, just, this is part of the atmosphere. This is part of that whole, I don't like running, but I love running events. This is a great embodiment of it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking back on a lot of my DNFs. I could have been, even though it was in my feelers, I could have been a better person to be around in the moment, but it is tough, but that's still something that I can take away. Cause I know I've had DNFs, but I have not had my last DNF. So that's something I'm definitely taking away from that. And my final lesson learned, this one I'm excited to try out, the citronella wax, putting that on your leg, the hot wax, mosquitoes away.
I'm going to start a branded product.
That's because then if you do like multiple races, you can do one leg, one race, and then like have wax removal of the hair. Then the next race you can do the other leg, and then you have 2 races with minimal bugs and super smooth legs. So I'm excited to give that a try.
Well, Halbert's bug wax. Oh my goodness.
Nicole, what was your lesson
Yes.
learned?
Yes. Okay. Lesson learned number 1. Don't snooze the alarm when you take your trail nap.
Or if you do have somebody to check on you, yeah.
Yep. Lesson number 2. Don't eat the mystery meat.
Pre-race mystery meat.
Yep. That's what I got.
Nice.
You actually stole mine. I was gonna say, if you're gonna take a trail nap, like, put somebody else in charge of waking you up, because that snoozing or just being like, "I'm gonna turn it off, get up," and then, you screw yourself.
Yeah, I totally thought, because it went off and I didn't intend to fall back asleep. I turned it off and thought, okay, did get my watch to get going. I was already starting that brain process, and then everything turned off. And the next thing I know, I'm waking up in a panic and I have to pee. So yeah, you need a babysitter if you're gonna nap.
I've set an alarm for 3 before, and then, like, I woke up at, like, 3:15, so not terrible, but I'm like, "What happened? My alarm didn't go off." I set it for 3 PM, not 3 AM. So that's another thing that could've got me, but luckily, I've had enough anxiety built up inside. I'm like, "Oh, what time is it?" So,
That's a
alright.
big one.
Albert, I'll let you
That's
wrap
all the
us
more
up.
incentive for my lesson learned. Always make sure I keep maintaining military time on my watches and stuff.
Military time, nice. That's a
Yeah,
good
that
one.
way. Yeah. Well, part of that's the Navy brat and everything else, and then 4 years in the Army and all that. But also, it's just math. But yeah, that's all the other things. That I'll now have to keep it that way, because my lesson learned will be, it won't be. I won't have to worry about setting it for the wrong 3 p.m. or 3 rather.
Yeah, that's true. I never thought of that. And then, Albert, do you have any other lessons learned from our time together today?
No, I was going to make a joke about echoing audio, but we never did figure out what was doing that, and it's gone. So
We'll figure it out.
yeah.
It'll
But
happen
yeah, I
again.
mean, with the general thing with everything else, I do have the, like I said, the repeated thing of don't do what I do, but just be active. That's it's as far as like the DNF or DFL kind of category is also just don't beat yourself up over things that don't go precisely how you expected them to. Life happens. I mean, it could be that it's just too hot today. It could be food poisoning from the spaghetti the night before, but it could just be, you know what, it's that one hill was just a little more intensive than you expected, or something else, or you spent too long chatting at that aid station, whatever. Just keep moving. If it's in your control, keep doing it. And we're not going to be perfect runners. I'm never going to be an elite, and I'm content with that. So I do these events because I enjoy the activity. I enjoy the people. I enjoy the community. And there is a distinction, like the sheer, like runners are generally supportive community, at least all of us in the back of the marathon pack. But ultra runners, I've seen a closer knit support group where complete stranger will get huge, everybody's cheering everybody on anyway, but it's so much more magnified at ultras. And so I can totally dig that, even with my, like I said, introvert by nature, but I've learned to socially interact. It's one of those things where it is appreciated to be out there and have those little nudges, because I'm trying to provide the same thing. You never know mentally what someone is going through out on that course. Our brains are assholes again. So sometimes just a quick little "you got this" could be something that gives somebody a little extra oomph.
I love that.
Yeah, great.
I can't believe we didn't have our brains are assholes is not one of our lessons learned. That should have been the top of the
I
list.
probably will make a shirt with that one, because
Yeah.
it's become one of the most common phrases I ever use during running events in general. Usually explaining it to, like I said, first timers, the marathons or whatever else. But it can be like me going out and like on those occasional actual training runs where it's not a race, but I need to get some miles in. It's like, okay, it's only another 2 miles. Stop and just do it.
Yeah, it was limiting beliefs. Albert, where can people find you to follow along on all your adventures?
At the races. I'm not big on the socials. I have a Facebook account that has 0 posts. I log in once every 6 months.
Nice.
I used to use it regularly before people got way more than what they are now.
Well, I get that. That'll wrap it up for this episode on Fails on the Trails. Thank you, Halbert, for joining us and going over all of your marathon finishes, few marathon DNFs, and all the lessons learned from the Citronella Wax Nate Lumen lights on the trails. Till next time, we will see you guys later.
Thanks for having me.